Hey everybody, welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Wade Acuff and I'll be your host today for day 2 with Natalie. Natalie, what's up? How's it going?
It's going good. I'm looking forward to showing more of the process today. How are you?
I'm doing really good. I'm excited to be hosting this. But before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what you can see on Behance and Adobe Live YouTube. You can check out the Illustrator Creative Challenges. They're happening every day. They happen right before this stream. Lots of other content you can check out as well. But also, and more importantly, I want to say hello to chat. How's it going, chat? Let me know where you're from, where you're watching from. And Natalie, if you'd like, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a recap from what we did yesterday and what we have planned for today.
Sure thing. So, hello everyone. I'm Natalie. I'm a trained motion graphics designer based in the New York metro area. I'm an Adobe certified professional in visual design and video design. I currently work with the Nielsen Company in New York City as a motion designer with their creative team, and I'm enjoying every opportunity to be able to work with them on projects. I also do visual effects compositing work with a variety of filmmakers based on previous recommendations. And in addition to that, I do social media production work for classic rock band The Black Ties. In the previous episode, I was working on stabilizing the footage and setting it up so that you could see a multi-panel screen of all of the different vantage points from the handheld to the two additional cameras. And I'm going to be doing some additional finesse in terms of color correction and animation in order to give it a little more of a dynamic visual. And I'm going to be continuing in that vein with additional compositions that I have set up in the Premiere timeline.
Oh, that sounds great. I did catch up a little bit about what you did yesterday, so I'm excited to see where this is going.
Thank
So,
you.
do you want to kick it off and let's get rolling?
Sure thing. So, for those of you that are seeing this in part two and maybe didn't see it in the first one, this is what I'm currently working on. One of the compositions is almost prepared, I should say. It still needs additional animation and color correction, but you can get an idea of the project that I'm putting together here. So here we go.
Awesome.
One, two,
So that gives you an overall idea of what I'm putting together. So what I'm introducing, because I have several camera inputs, including a handheld. So there's two fixed cameras and one handheld. And the complication arises when, because I'm having to work around the crowd and work around other photographers, there
Mhm.
is a chance that there's going to be camera shake and that the vantage point is going to change because I'm trying to represent all of the musicians that are performing so that it's a cohesive promo that features everyone involved. What I like to do is add a little additional polish, excuse me,
Mhm.
including stabilizing the footage, color correction, and in this case, playing with track mats so that you can see a multi-panel view of all of the different cameras. So I'm going to jump into After Effects here, and I'm going to pick up where I left off. This one is mostly prepared from the previous stream, and I'm going to go ahead and set the resolution to quarter just to streamline it for all of you. So this is what I had the last time, working from shaky handheld footage up until smoothing it out to this point. But what it also needs, I think, is a little more of a cohesive look. So what I like to do, especially in the case of the fixed cameras, because the color values are a bit different because
Mhm.
of where the camera is situated and the color
Right.
balance of that camera. I like to pull up Lumetri here. And sometimes, depending on how I have it set up, if I've got a mask over the footage, sometimes the footage will squish within that mask,
Mhm.
which It's a bit of a trial and error process, but what I like to do here, if I'm going based on the highlight and shadow tones of the handheld, now what I like to mention on my personal streams on Behance is that you can work with the standalone adjustments of brightness contrast, the levels adjustments, hue saturation. But the reason I like to work with Lumetri, while it's a learning curve and there's a lot of different controls,
Hmm.
the more you use it, the more you're able to finesse it and know what everything does. So, but I also
Yeah.
like the precision involved with an effects adjustment like this.
Yeah, it can definitely look a little intimidating too when you get started because you're not sure what where things place. But I think the more you kind of use it, the more you get, I use it a little bit in my work, and I'm really like wanting to see how is there any baseline where you start or um, any tips or tricks for jumping into a Lumetri color.
That's a good question. So, in the case of working with Lumetri, if you are doing color grading or color correction, and this especially applies to working with film footage, you are going to want to watch the scopes
Hmm.
because if there's an area where the values seem to be crushed, whether it's the highest value or the lowest, so the highest highlight or the lowest shadow, if those values become crushed, you lose that color value and therefore the footage may become distorted. So you want to be very careful that while you want it to have a balanced look, you don't want it to be over processed to the point where it distorts the final
Hmm.
output.
Are you going to show us any like what the scope view would look like, or
Oh, let me see
just
if
kind
I
of give?
can. Lumetri scopes. Here we go.
There it
So
is.
So if you notice, the colors are fluctuating. There are some that are directly at the top,
Hmm.
and that's because it's the highest highlight value. It really depends on the footage you're working with. In my case, I'm just balancing the tones, but if you're working with footage that, for example, instead of being in REC 709, it's in Cinelog or or Cine S Log 3, you're going to want to watch those values and make sure that it doesn't create a solid line at any
Hmm.
point. Because if it ends up becoming a bold line, what it's actually doing is separating the color tones of the footage itself into different points based on this graph here, which is pretty interesting. So it kind of looks like a 3D uh, a 3D screen of what you're looking at.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I think when it first finally clicked for me how to use a scope or what to look for in a scope. Like if you watch the footage in your left frame and also the left scope, you can kind of see where the highlights and like the two band members start to interplay as you scrub through.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, but thank you for showing that because a lot of times people don't go into how to use scopes or how to look at scopes.
Of course.
Not trying to derail you from your process at all.
No, but it is helpful for some people that maybe they've never seen it before. Maybe they're
Hmm.
curious about it. It's good to show those things. I mean, after all, it may be helpful to some people.
So what were you doing? What was your baseline with these? What were we trying to correct or change?
Well, mainly what I'm doing is I am matching the highlight and
Okay.
shadow tones here and later on in this clip here to the handheld footage here, which has a blue undertone to it. So
Hmm.
I'm trying to give it an overall cohesive feel.
Gotcha.
So that is what I'm currently working on. Okay. Now, because the vantage points are different, I want to give a custom treatment to both that will later be helpful with the additional clips where there will be a multi-panel appearance like this. So I brought in the Lumetri adjustments from the first one, and it mostly looks consistent, but I want to check some settings, make sure that there's a nice pop and contrast overall. Let me check the basic corrections here. Again, a lot of what you can do in Lumetri, you can absolutely do in the standalone. It's a matter of personal preference. I just prefer to have as much precision as possible when working in a process like this. So right now I'm working with slightly adjusting the highlight and shadow tones in different vantage points. Now, in addition to this, I'm also going to be playing with the reveal of each panel. I'm going to check that one, make sure that it's just a little bit of emphasis.
So which panel are you working on? Oh, I see it. I see it changing now.
Yeah, it's this one down here.
Right, yeah.
So I had two fixed cameras and one handheld. The handheld being the one on the left side of the composition.
Is there any reason you chose that one to match to, or just you preferred that one, or what was the process for that?
Well, the color tones in the footage from the handheld are pretty accurate to how it looked on stage.
Oh, okay.
In that case, I also liked the overall appearance of it, so I wanted to match to that look. So the undertone was consistent all the way through. Okay, so that looks pretty balanced right now in terms of color. The undertones seem to match each other, which is good. So now what I like to do is I'm actually going to jump into Premiere for just a second because I have to find some time codes, and I have this all set up inside of the Premiere timeline because I like to work with the dynamic link. What I do is I will work between programs, and what I like about using the dynamic link is there are different strengths to both Premiere and After Effects. I like to use Premiere because it allows me to really sync up the audio and the visuals just overall. And then if I want to do more detailed adjustments, I can go into After Effects. And what I do with the dynamic link, it'll automatically update inside of the Premiere timeline.
So we're seeing the color corrections you made already happening. Yeah.
So you can do more detailed adjustments inside of After Effects, and if it's linked to Premiere, it'll automatically update.
That's brilliant.
That's what I like about it.
Yeah.
So anything to streamline the production process, I am willing to explore, research, and
we have a question from Anthony. Natalie, do you ever use a gimbal when capturing concert footage?
That's a very good question. I actually have a harness. It's a stabilizing harness that and in this case, I actually had that harness for this production. I have film performances handheld, but I also have the option of the harness that allows me to focus on capturing the footage without worrying about maybe my arms aching or my back aching. And so I have a harness with a video mount, so I have full flexibility to move around the band, move around the crowd, regardless of the size of the environment, the audience, how close they are to me. I've had to upgrade my equipment over time, expanding the camera equipment, expanding setup, where I can capture the audio sources from, especially in the case of working with a rock band. You want it to be optimal sound by the end of what you capture in order for the...
Yeah, absolutely.
So it depends on the situation, but usually I will wear a harness. Especially if it's a longer production like what they were a part of, which was they were doing this as part of a music festival that took place. There was a this entire production revolved around the performance of the soundtrack of Beatles' Love, and in the case of the Black Ties, they were representing the early Beatles at certain points, so they were performing
Hmm.
some of those songs as part of this, and the production was just phenomenal. The way the stage was arranged, everything about it was just really nicely presented, and I was thrilled that I captured footage that allowed for illumination from the stage lights and
Hmm. We talked a little bit about this earlier, well, off camera, off before we got on live. But so we were talking about you going to these events and kind of doing everything behind the scenes. I mean, do you have like a favorite part that you like to hone in on? I know you're trying to like do everything, but I can imagine a setting like that could be very distracting and getting caught up in the production and in everything else.
well, it's actually a there's several parts that I really enjoy.
Hmm.
Uh, in terms of the production process, one of my favorite things to capture is when either the musicians, in the case of this entire performance, because I captured the entire event here, including the black ties. In the case of capturing any musician, some of my favorite things that happen are when they engage the camera, where you can clearly see that they're excited to be there and that they love performing for the audience. Those are wonderful moments to capture. In the case of the band that I work with, the Black Ties, there are many moments where some of the musicians will be goofing off with one another either before they start performing, maybe they're doing a sound check, or maybe during the performance. And I love capturing those moments of them where you can clearly see that they are enjoying themselves
Yeah.
and you see their natural charisma come out. So that's exciting for me to capture while I'm in the moment
Right.
filming. But I also love going in and playing with the footage afterwards, seeing what I captured and if there's any really strong moments, being able to include those in promos that I'm putting together, but also adding additional polish like what you're seeing here with color correction and additional animation adjustments, allowing for reveals of certain moments. So what I'm actually doing right now is I added a couple of markers based on the time code in Premiere, and those are going to allow me to animate the reveal of each individual panel in addition to giving it a cohesive feel. So there's one more section I want to Yep, there's one more marker. Okay, so 5 frames in. So it's a little bit of everything, but especially going in and finalizing so it can be presented in the best possible light.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of everything involved in my training in motion graphics and visual effects. I pride myself on being a strong generalist, and depending on what designer you talk to, some can have an understanding of many parts of the production process, but others, maybe they have a more specialized take on a specific part of motion design or visual effects.
Yeah.
And maybe they know more details than, say, a generalist would, but it's a matter of personal preference based on who you talk to. And that's kind of the wonderful thing about working in motion design is that the approach can completely vary based on who the designer is.
Hmm. Absolutely. So you already knew what the timing of this was going to be, or at least close to what it was going to be, right?
Yes, and that's based on the beat of the song, which
Mm.
I want the visuals to sync up with the rhythm of the song. And so that's why I go back and forth and make sure that the time codes match inside of After Effects so that they line up inside of Premiere.
Right. Uh, Another question I was thinking about, and I'm sure you've done this so many times now. Do you, when watching or recording a performance, especially when those moments you were talking about happen, do you kind of go, "Oh yeah, this I'm," you start piecing and editing it together in your head before you even get the footage back?
Absolutely. In the case of the music that they perform, almost all of it is music that I love and music
Mhm.
uh that I already know, and I know where the high points are in the songs that they're performing. And so I make a mental checklist as I'm filming the band to go to a specific musician at a certain point, maybe
Oh
during the
yeah.
chorus if they're singing lead, but to make sure to also capture the other musicians involved so that there is a visual variety with the final product. But some of the best moments that I absolutely know I can include are usually when you can tell that they are enjoying themselves. Maybe they engage the camera, which is always fun for me. Maybe they goof off, which is
Right.
also enjoyable to capture. Those end up being little outtakes that I feature as part
Mhm.
of what I call Mischief Monday.
Oh, that's
So
fun.
every so often I'll share a an outtake of them goofing off, just having fun, working together, which is nice.
Do you do
But
that?
then I'm
Oh, I'm
sorry.
sorry. Is that on your own personal stream that you do that? Um, you were just talking about uh, showing outtakes and that sort of thing. Is that
Yeah, I've
oh,
shown
okay?
those before. It
Gotcha.
depends on the moment captured, but whatever feels strong in the moment, I will absolutely represent.
Hmm.
So if you get a feel for their personalities, I absolutely want to include that.
For sure. Robert has a question saying he doesn't recall if we heard a story on how you met the black ties.
Oh, okay. Well, a long time ago, actually not that long ago, back in 2019, I was an event goer at the Fest for Beatles fans in Jersey City. And I met the two brothers in the band, Brian and Andrew, and they were taking part in the Sound Alike competition as a duo. But they were later performing as part of the Battle of the Bands as a complete ensemble. And I met them back then, but what I did, and I tend to do this whenever I take part in any event, I can't help but create.
Hmm.
So what I ended up doing was I would go and I would capture different musicians that were performing. And a lot of that harkens back to my training, my basic training in digital filmmaking, and also my training in concert photography. I took a class with a Rolling Stone magazine photographer, and
Oh
so we
wow.
learned the do's and don'ts of concert photography, how to capture the musicians performing, and in that case, when I was taking the course, it was to capture Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues, Mike Dawes, who's an acoustic guitarist, and Julie Reagans, who was the keyboardist. And so I remembered all of that, and it all, it all came back to me when I was capturing the Black Ties performing as part of the Battle of the Bands. And by the way, they actually won that.
Oh
So
wow.
it was a wonderful moment, and their band manager got in contact with me, and he was he really liked the photographs that I captured of them back at the event. He thought they were incredibly strong, and I kept in contact with the band since then. And then later on, they asked me to do work as social media producer to promote them
Very
for
cool.
upcoming events and to create video promos. And
That's great. So you were just basically taking photos, being a fan, and they saw the
yeah,
work. That's awesome. That's a great story.
they definitely brought the house down.
If you're just joining us, we are here with Natalie, and Natalie is working on polishing. I guess what we started yesterday, band promo. Is that the way to say this?
yeah,
Promotional video. Yeah,
social
social
media
aspects.
promo. So right now I'm working on the reveals of each panel. So quite fast. I'm going to slow that down just a little bit more.
Robert says, "Great story, Natalie."
Oh,
I,
thank
I
you.
f- I completely agree. Those are always good stories when you're like, "Oh yeah, I did a thing I liked, and then people saw it, and now I'm working with them." That's always a good story.
Absolutely. So if I'm going based on the timing of the first panel, it's about 10 frames. And where am I starting here? So it's going to go to about 29. Now, if I remember correctly, that one's going to, oh, you know what? I remember how I had this set up. Okay, so okay, I'm just checking. All right. I think it would be stronger if it revealed from the bottom edge. So I'm going to set that up.
In chat, if you have any more questions, please feel free to share. We'll do our best to answer all the questions.
All right, so I'm lining that up. I'm going to move that guide over just a little bit so it's more center in the frame. And I'm going to change that anchor point so that it's center over that. All right. And so that's one. And then there's the second frame here. What you're seeing me do right now by changing the keyframe is I introduced Bezier curves to the motion, and that's going to help a bit later on in order for it to have a more fluid feel. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a minute. All right, so if it's, all right.
Anthony's asking about a production, has a production question. Do you get to scope out the venue beforehand to kind of plan your shots, plan what you're going to be recording?
Yes, usually I will get there ahead of time to check the vantage points, set up camera, and occasionally, if I have to, I can double check and see that it's the best possible positioning, especially for the fixed cameras. But I
Mhm.
also get a feel for where I can move around, how much room do I have, if it's a smaller venue and the crowd is closer to you, as an example,
Right.
or if you're working around photographers. There's many factors to take into consideration, but I take note of all of it before they get started.
Sam also has a question. Do you need specific cameras for lenses for video, or does everything that works for photography also work for video?
That depends on the camera capabilities of what you're looking at. Some of the processes of production will require more specific cameras. If you're doing general video production, if you're doing, for example, what I'm putting together,
Mhm.
as long as the camera quality is strong enough, you can definitely do a lot with it. But it does depend on what it presents. So ultimately, if you're hoping to go into film production, you may want to look at at cameras that are more designed for that process. So it really depends on the production process of the equipment that you are researching.
I hope that answers your question, Sam. We all want to see what kind of videos you put together, so be sure to share that with us. Uh,
Absolutely.
let's see. Let's see. There's another question here. I think we sort of answered this before. Reverb Mike asked, "Do you plan how all the clips will come together ahead of time, or do you just go with your gut?"
It's a bit of both. um, a lot of it is done spontaneously, especially in the case of handheld footage.
Yeah, you kind of look through what you have, make some selects, and then start putting it together.
Ultimately, the goal is to present something that has strong visuals, but also a nice variety as well. Now, what I always take into account when filming the black ties, I want to make sure that I capture highlight moments that would add to the production of the song. So if there's a particular, if a musician is singing lead, I make sure to capture them at specific points. But then I
Mhm.
also make sure to go to every other musician and make sure they're represented as well. All right, so that's 1 second, one frame. So I'm going to go 10 frames ahead. All right.
Robert has a question. I'm not sure what he's referring to, but we'll ask it anyway. Robert's asking, "Do you still do the Arrow project?" I'm not sure if that's something that.
Oh,
Oh, so
I know
you.
what he's,
Okay,
yeah, I
excellent.
know what he's referring to. So on my Behance page, I have a number of tests that I've done in Adobe Aero. So playing with augmented reality and creating designs that can be put into an augmented reality space. Uh, I do plan on doing more in the future, but I am juggling quite a few deadlines for a number of clients. So the answer is I will come back to it, but I have to make sure that I meet my deadlines.
All
That's
right.
always something that I make sure to mention to anyone that is tuning in or if they have questions. Uh, Always make sure to meet your deadlines.
Yeah, deadlines come first. Yeah, I assumed you knew what Robert was talking about.
Yeah.
That's cool. I've dabbled a little bit with Arrow. It's a lot of fun. All right, so I see you're getting the masks animated here. This is a good example of giving everybody representation too in multiple shots.
I thought it would be interesting to play with featuring multiple vantage points from different cameras
Hmm.
uh in unison. So you're seeing multiple panels, you're seeing multiple vantage points, but you're seeing them all at the same time. So I'm going to play with the motion a little bit here. All right, let me see if I can. There it is. So what I'm doing right now is I'm playing with I want to get the terminology right here. I'm playing with the graph editor. And so I'm adjusting the Bezier curves so that the motion has a little more weight to it.
What do you what is that you're adjusting? Is that the speed in which it moves out? Is that an ease out, ease in situation?
Yes, the
Okay,
interpolation of that
there it is.
motion going from point A to point B. Now, earlier I talked about changing the keyframe from linear to Bezier.
Hmm.
And what that does is, as an example, if you have linear keyframes, it's very similar to the motion that you would see in the Atari game Pong, as an example, where the motion is constant and it's back and forth. But if you're adding ease in, ease out, or in some groups it's referred to slow in, slow out.
Right.
it'll add sort of a slide into that position. So it slows down and it smooths out the motion. It'll vary it up, but it'll feel more fluid as a result. So depending on the visual look that you want, you can play with different keyframe approaches and the interpolation of the motion overall. So I'm going to look at those. I'm going to zoom in on this so it's so right now I'm playing with just the overall timing of that movement by playing with the graph editor.
Right. It looks like you're extending those handles to kind of create more slower out, slower in, and a little faster in the middle.
All right, so that's one. I'm going to check the motion on this panel here. Now, the one thing I always like to take into account when I'm working on a process like this is how the overall effects adjustments add to the presentation of the footage. One of the best pieces of advice that I was taught when I was studying at Ringling College of Art and Design, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And what I mean by that is you want to take into account what it's for, who it's for, the stylistic approach, how it should be presented, and take that all into account when working in a process like this. You especially want the effects adjustments to enhance what you're working with rather than overtake what you're working with. So a lot of this preparation is based on what was captured, but also what's meant to be presented in addition.
Yeah, I've heard something similar along the lines of add to the story, don't distract.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great way to put it. So one thing I always like to do is just add an overall adjustment to any of the clips I'm working with. Now, sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't. Now, of course,
Yeah. It's
now
very
again,
powerful.
I always take into account visibility, so I make adjustments to allow it to be the most visible, but give it that overall polish, that presentation. I like playing with color channels and seeing what I can do to play with the presentation a bit. So a tiny bit of separation on the edges, but I always make sure that it doesn't distort anyone that's being featured in addition. So again, enhance rather than obscure. Now this one looks like it's pretty ready to go. I have additional ones set up in the timeline. And if we go back to Premiere, so you're not seeing it right now, but if I scroll down just a little bit, there it is. It updated right away inside of Premiere because of the dynamic link, which is what's great about it. I use it all the time. So
yeah, it's one of my favorite newer enhancements to all of the workflow. It's gone are the days where you have to like render something out, bring it back into, Premiere. Mostly. There are always exceptions, but
it really does streamline the entire process. And I tend to, After Effects is my go-to on a daily basis.
Yeah.
But really, so are other programs in the Creative Suite and any programs that work alongside of those. I also work with anything to allow for the streamlining of the production process. I do research on, I look into, and I will adopt into my process. If it allows me to expand my capabilities
Hmm.
as a trained motion designer and visual effects compositor, I'm willing to look into it.
Yeah, I think it's kind of we're always learning, always trying to improve.
Yes,
Something new comes out, you uh, see if it works for you, adjust for it. Uh, you know, it's an ongoing process, I think, which I personally enjoy that. I'm always excited about something new that I might be able to add to the arsenal or, um, and there's always something new. There's always something new coming out. They're always working on something. Something will be updated. And then, the learning curve, steep or not, it's always fun to jump in.
absolutely. So I went through and I stabilized some of the handheld footage in the following composition. And so you're going to see some additional vantage points from different musicians, but also the fixed cameras. So I'm going to go ahead and start setting up the frames. Now, some people may want to work with masks instead of working with the solids overall, or in some cases, if you want to work with shapes, it's a matter of personal preference how you want to do this. But what we're essentially doing is creating an arrangement that will later become track mats for each individual piece of footage that's going to be featured in a multi-panel setup.
We have another question from Robert. How do you sync multicams when you shoot them live?
So typically what I like to do, and I've had to expand my setup over time based on this, I would look at the audio sources and find a specific point, maybe if there is a drum beat, and that allows everything else to sync up after that. But I also, and I actually brought this with me. So I actually have a movie board
Oh,
exactly for processes like this, especially when I expanded my camera setup. But you can absolutely do it based on if you have a really loud drum beat, as an example, or if you know there's a loud moment where they kick off the song or anything. That will also allow you to sync up your visuals. So I go based on if I don't have the movie board with me, I tend to uh, problem solve that way.
hmm. Yeah, many a time we've just used the clap in front of the camera. It's an old standard.
Definitely. Well, if you have the ability to use a clapboard, it will definitely let you know where it all lines up. All right, so I want to make this frame a little bit larger. Now, considering there's going to be 4 vantage points here, I'm also taking into account the setup overall.
So you called this is a social media promo video. What is it geared towards any specific social media platform, or is it just for general use and you'll refit it to the different platforms afterwards, or how do you go about doing that?
That's a good question. Typically, I like to work in uh 16 by 9 formats. So it has more of a cinematic feel to it. Now I will make stories, which are a vertical format,
Hmm.
but I will always take into account how accurate the presentation is, if I'm keeping all of the details in that I initially started with. So keeping the integrity of the visuals is always the most important part of the process. But when I capture the band, I do it with my basic training in digital filmmaking. So making sure the compositions are strong and sound.
Hmm.
And that it represents them in the strongest light possible. So right now what I'm doing is I am going through and arranging, because there's going to be at least 4 panels here. Some of them are going to be more vertical.
So are you doing a layout for where these panels are going to be
Yes.
using the mask you'll probably animate later? Kristen Williams says, "Hello, Natalie. I'm so proud of you. This is all fascinating. To learn about and see what you do."
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. Okay, so a lot of this is based on the setup of the composition, ensuring that it's in rule of thirds, but also based on what looks the strongest in addition.
Can you explain what the rule of thirds means?
Oh, certainly. So in filmmaking, the rule of thirds is used to arrange a composition a certain way, giving more of a perspective and more of a balance to whatever visual you're capturing. And in the case of digital filmmaking, it allows you to line up footage from shot to shot going through so that there is a consistent feel, especially in the case of show production, broadcast production, motion pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It's a standard in filmmaking that gives a nice visual cohesion overall. And I always, whenever I am capturing any subject matter, it doesn't have to be necessarily musicians. I always take that into account.
Yeah.
So this is starting to look good. It's going to feature both vantage points from the handheld, but also the 2 fixed cameras. So that's all set up. I'm going to hide those for the moment, and I'm going to play with the 2 handheld vantage points. And what I'm going to do, since I've already stabilized the footage here, I'm going to set up a null, and I'm going to play with the position, rotation, well, the position, the scale, possibly the rotation as I move through.
And what is a null layer? For
What
anyone
a
that, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no. What a null does is it allows you to either you want it to be the parent layer controlling another layer, so you can make adjustments to that without necessarily interfering with the setup of another one that's parented. Or if you, let's say, as an example, if you're working with the camera inside of After Effects, and you can absolutely do this, you can parent the camera to a null and then control the camera's movement based on that null and where that goes. What it allows you to do is it allows you to streamline that part of the process so you have more control overall based on well based on any process really. It can
Yeah.
be applied to a number of things.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of using nulls, especially if I'm like doing a lot of motion or anything to another layer that I may want to keep their anchor point the same, so I can adjust the null all I want to and nothing changes on the original layer. But I knew what you were using them for. I just wanted to anybody that might not know what a null is out there to get an idea.
It definitely allows for more control and ultimately will streamline your process. So it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely worth looking into. So what I'm doing right now is, and I did this in a different but similar process in the previous episode. I am manually keyframing the position and scale of this particular clip here. So that it is framed nicely within the track mat itself. So there's a shift right over there. I'm gonna move that over just a little bit.
Oh, that's cool. So that's just like doing it without tracking and trying to stabilize it. You're just kind of making sure it's in a general location.
In this circumstance, yes. Now
Yeah.
I did stabilize the footage prior so that,
Okay.
uh, and I can show a little bit of this. So what I did ahead of time, and there are different ways to go about this. You can use the warp stabilizer, or you can do it manually, which is what I opt to do because it allows for the most precise control over the motion. And it's a bit of a trial and error process, but I've found that depending on the footage you capture, you can get different results. But it's also a matter of personal preference, how you want to go about stabilizing your footage and also the quality that it brings. So the reason that I opt to go with the more manual approach is there are circumstances where I will be working with footage of musicians and maybe they just happen to bounce with the rhythm on stage, keeping beat. But what will happen is it'll stabilize around them. So the background looks like it's bouncing rather than
Hmm.
stabilizing it as you would expect. So it's a trial and error process, but it is good to know that there are several answers to the same question. And that's the important thing.
Yeah.
And I think I just,
Yeah, I like this solution too because a lot of times I will, if I'm doing any kind of tracking, it depends on, like you said, depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Sometimes I'm going through and deleting some keyframes in the track. It's like that doesn't work for me. So, and this kind of like it's a little bit of both. I like it.
now this one is starting to come together. There's a little bit of a bounce right there. I'm just going to check that motion. Okay, so I'm just going to check that overall. It looks pretty smooth.
Yeah, it's nice.
So that's one. And now I can move on to the next clip, which is another handheld. So let me take a look here. That is one of the. I decide the arrangement based on what's going to best represent what I've captured overall. And it'll vary based on what was filmed at that specific point, what the strongest aspect is of that point. So there are variables to consider in
Hmm.
the process, in addition to making sure that the footage itself is the strongest it can be. How it's presented also is taken into account. And if it turns out that I need to make adjustments along the way or go in a different direction, I can do that as needed. All right, so right now what I'm doing is I'm making sure that it's in frame, but I can also play with the the arrangement as well. And it looks like I might have to make this a little bit larger to
So in
account
this,
for,
oh, sorry,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I was just going to say that I'm making the frame a little bit larger to account for both musicians in that frame.
I was going to ask a production question.
Mhm.
So you had mentioned like capturing some of this yourself, but you said you had two handhelds and two stable cameras. Were you operating both or one of those handhelds, or were you like what was your in this specific uh, scenario? What were you operating either one of them?
So my setup is actually I have in this case, in this part of the production, the camera arrangement will vary, but I had one handheld and two fixed cameras. So I'll
Okay, so
go
there's
through and I'll go through and I'll find the strongest visuals and find ways to give variety to the show that I'm presenting in this case.
Yeah, I was leading up to a question, very poorly getting there, but I was trying to ask, do you have a shooting style? Because I really like this is just might just be me, but there's a couple of moments where one of the band members pops out of focus, but then they come back. Are some of those things intentional, or is it just whatever happens at the time?
A lot of this process is mostly me rolling with the situation
Gotcha.
and seeing what I can capture. Typically, I like to make sure that if I have to pan, zoom in on a particular person, that that is completely in focus. I like to have as much control over that aspect so that the visuals are the strongest they can be. So I'll tend to work in a more detailed approach when it comes to that. As for the focusing changing at
Hmm.
times, that is in the moment and that is based on if I have to change vantage point or change the zoom on a particular camera.
Yeah, I only mention it because I think it really works here. Like I like that
Thank you.
it's very handheld, very where it kind of gives you that you're in the moment, look. And I didn't know if that was a style choice or just the nature of being there and trying to film it.
A lot of it is based around what I know is going to be the strongest way to
Hmm.
capture a particular a particular subject matter, but it's also knowing in the moment what's going to work versus what's not going to work. So a lot of
Right.
times I'll be moving around the crowd, I'll be moving around to other vantage points, depending on where the stage is, just to ensure that I have the strongest visuals possible. So there is a lot of movement involved with this. So I'm going to bring that in just a little bit because
For anybody just joining us, we are with Natalie, and she is working on this social media promo video, doing some polishing, showing us how to work with After Effects. Um, and I'm really liking it so far. I like where we're going with it. What are we up to now? Like, I know we're still making masks here.
so what I'm
Um,
opting to do under the circumstances so that it's the strongest presentation possible, I'm actually going to break it up into 3 panels featuring the handheld footage.
oh, I see. Instead of the extra two that you had on the side,
Right.
right?
Because ultimately, I want to be sure that Ben, the lead guitarist over here, is well framed. And sometimes you have to make those decisions in the moment.
Mhm.
what's going to make it ultimately stronger. And then if you decide that it's better to go in a different direction, that you can do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to play with the overall scale here. Let me take a look. But this will actually allow for more flexibility under the circumstances. So now that I'm going to be rearranging it a bit, I'm going to add some more control nulls here. I'm just going to say panel. And you can label these any way you want. You can color code them any way you want. It's all a matter of personal preference. All right, so I'm going to move this over. Oh, it would help if I had everything else parented to the null as well. All right. There we go. That's how it's supposed to look. And let's see. So now we're going to do the same thing for panel number 2.
I think we have another question from Robert, and I think what's being asked is how do you record the you were talking about using the movie board. How do you record that? Is that from camera or from a separate mixer or soundboard?
I've actually worked in both processes. Usually when I'm working with footage that's captured live, I'm working with the audio input from that actual performance from the cameras themselves. But what I like to do is I like to work with equipment that will allow me to film, but will also capture the most optimal sound. So I've actually, uh, I have an on-camera microphone that I work with my handheld, and I also work with equipment that's designed to capture the most optimal sound, but also capture different vantage points as well. And that's all done based on research.
Yeah. I hope that answers your question, Robert.
I'm going to re-keyframe these just to make it a little bit easier. All right, so I know how this should be framed. Again, the goal is to strongly frame the visuals in the best possible way, which is why we broke up the second panel into
Mm-hmm.
into we split it into 2, basically.
Right.
Sometimes you have to follow the movement. So the panel on the far right side of the screen is nearly ready. I'm just going to check how that looks. Just a moment. Now, one additional thing I like to do is I will set the keyframes so it's continuous movement all the way through. So there is an S curve on the keyframes, but it's Now, there's a little bit of a bounce right there. I'm going to check that, see what's going on. Now, if you make any adjustments to those, it'll turn into keyframes that are eased, which if you control click, you can actually cycle through different approaches to keyframing, whether you want eases or whether you want it to be linear. Okay, that sort of bounces all the way over there. So what I'm gonna do, I think ultimately it looked a little more smooth. Let me see what's going on here. That's why. It's that keyframe right there. Okay, so that one's ready to go. And the other two are going to be a bit more streamlined. So I'm going to take a look here. Oh, it would help if I wasn't moving the top null and instead working with the null underneath.
So, how long have you been working with this band? I know you mentioned when you in the backstory when you met them, but did they continue? I know things have been tough for the past couple of years, but was there a lot of work with them between then, or when? You know, how often do you do shows? Are things gearing up? You know, all of those things.
That's a really good question. Usually I am asked to come and film at specific performances, usually ones that will work with a multi-camera setup. Some of the venues are a bit smaller, or there's or not much room in order to set up that equipment, but usually some of the bigger performances I'm asked to go to. I'm trying to figure out why it's not moving. And I think I just figured it out. There it is. Okay. So now that I've figured that out, I should be able to keyframe. But for example, when things were in lockdown, they had to resort to doing more virtual performances. So I had to do research on how to set up for that in order for them to perform for different music venues, but allow everybody to watch from the comfort of their own home. And ultimately, that was a successful experience. And I was able to expand my capabilities, my equipment, my overall setup to be able to work in other, to capture other opportunities. Essentially working around the situation to problem solve.
Right.
Which is sort of the crux of motion design itself. That's what's stressed about it, is problem solving.
So
you know,
true.
having a creative situation come up and figuring out how to work around it and present the best possible result. And that was absolutely a part of it.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm checking I can actually zoom in on that one a bit more. And see if I can move the group of keyframes over just a little bit. Sometimes this works. Well, that's kind of an accidental overlay, but it's kind of interesting. You're seeing a little bit of the
Yeah.
fixed camera in between the panels here.
I was going to ask you if you planned on leaving that.
That I might want to polish it a bit further, but I kind of like how it looks. It adds a bit of a textural experimental feel to it. So I might keep that in. That tends to happen quite a bit too, what I refer to as happy accidents.
Yeah, yeah.
So right now I'm framing Andrew here. All right. So right now I'm jumping to keyframes here and making sure that the focus stays on that particular musician. If there's two in a particular vantage point, but you're featuring one of them, making sure that they are framed well within that track mat. Oh, I just saw a little bit. It's hard to see, but because the footage was stabilized, there's a little bit of a dip right here. So I have to add a little bit of a positioning adjustment there just to again make sure that everything is in frame and that it's smooth all the way through. Now, what I typically like to do in this process is I will go and jump in the timeline so that there's a smooth interpolation from keyframe to keyframe. There are circumstances, for example, if you are working with track mats in visual effects compositing, where you will have to go frame by frame, maybe because the motion, maybe the subject matter that you're capturing is a bit more complex in detail, or maybe the motion is more rapid. You're going to want to take into account the best possible approach if you are attempting to single out that particular part of the footage. Now, the reason that I would recommend starting with looser interpolations like this, rather than going frame by frame, is that the motion will be a lot smoother for an approach like this, but there are times where you'll have to work with frame by frame, but the thing you're going to want to watch out for is if there is an unintentional flicker or jump effect if you're going frame by frame. So I'm almost through smoothing out the middle panel here. I'm just going to check that particular panel at the moment here. There's a little bit of a jump at certain points, so I'm going to go back and check those. Like there as an example. Now you may notice I have the title action safe guide set up, and in Premiere it's referred to as the safe margins. And what it's typically used for is if you're working with an older broadcast format, you want to make sure that specific information stays within certain margins. If you are working with a a more antiquated format for broadcast or television. But I like to use it just as an overall visual guide so that I know the exact center of the footage is. That's the nice thing about it.
Yeah. Mike chiming in with guides are your friend. Are your
Yes.
friends. Yep.
I completely agree. Guides can absolutely be your best friend. All right, so I'm jumping to each keyframe that's set up, and I'm checking the balance, I'm checking the position. All right. Some of them it's a little more difficult because of the headroom.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Are you just using the arrow keys on a keyboard to move it around? Like once you position over a keyframe?
Oh, you mean moving the position up and down?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
You can do it multiple ways. You can move it with the mouse. You can move it by going shift up, down. There's multiple ways to get to the same result, and that's what's nice about it. So, whatever process you're most comfortable with, you can absolutely apply to a process like this. Okay, there's a little bit of a shift back and forth there, so I'm going to take a look at that. That's where it is. Much, much smoother.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now that that's ready, I can move on to the next part of the process. I also wondered, although I think that looks really interesting, I do have to rearrange the panels a bit because of where they are currently. So I'm just going to do a little organizing here. Let me take a look. All right, so panel 1, control. And then we're going to parent it to that. I'm also going to color code these just to make it a little easier for me to work with visually.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of color coding and labeling.
Typically, I like to go based on print colors, so CMYK.
Oh, nice.
So, for example, there it is, cyan for 1. Fuchsia is going to stand as magenta. I'm going to make sure that that is also organized. Oh, those are the additional panels right there, so I'm going to label those green. And then the last panel here, to make that yellow, we're going to label that as fuchsia. It just cleans it up visually if you take care of that ahead of time. So everything is parented, everything is set up. So now we can start playing with the arrangement. But now I need to, okay, there we go. That's what needed to be parented. Now that panel is a little bit larger. I'm going to make sure that they're all uniform because of the approach that's being taken with this. So I'm going to frame it over there. I actually kind of like the little bit of the fixed camera showing through. It wasn't planned, but it's
Right. Seems
definitely
to be working.
Yeah. All right, so So it's definitely coming together. Now I wondered if, now that's the footage that's underneath. Now I actually thought about having a separate panel below. So let's say it's situated down here. Although that all depends on what is being captured at the moment.
Right.
Let me see what I have at the moment, and then I can decide.
Yeah, that. What do you have in mind for that? Like maybe a wide shot of the stage, or?
I was thinking of having at least another panel showing one of the fixed cameras below in addition to the handheld.
Yeah, that could be cool.
Oh, you know what? I just noticed something about that frame. Let me take a look at this here. There it is. So I'm going to move this up just a little bit. But I'm also going to make sure that it's, yeah, the balance is a bit stronger on that side of the screen now. Just with an overall adjustment to position and scale to that particular clip so that it balances out well with the other two.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do the same thing on the panel that features the lead guitarist, Ben. All right. Move that down. The lighting during this production was just fantastic. All right, so I see one thing I need to adjust on the left-hand panel.
That brings up an interesting question. Do you have to bring in your own supplemental lighting, or is it always like what's there and then adjust it in post?
Usually I'm working with the lighting situation at the time, whether
okay.
it's being captured in an inside venue or outdoors in the sunlight. Sometimes there are wonderful opportunities for illumination. Either there's sun rays that burst through to the stage and it just captures the musicians in a beautiful way. Anything that visually enhances the event and their performance, I'm always happy to capture. Okay, so what I am thinking of doing is having a smaller panel below. Oh, you know what? I have an idea. Rather than rearranging the panels that are already set up, I'm going to try this. So which one is this? This is, okay, that's camera A. Oh, you know what? I think I might have a way to include the other vantage points.
Oh, we're gonna put those down, both of them down here, or?
I'm gonna see how that looks. But ultimately, if it looks stronger, just focusing on the 3 panels, then I will go in that direction. All right, so what I'm also going to do is bring this up just a bit more. And I'm going to zoom this out. So you see a bit more of the stage and of the performers. And I go based on what's going to frame it well. It's more elongated, but it actually, I think that's quite interesting.
Yeah, it gives us a perspective on what's happening on the stage. Mike had a suggestion. Reverb Mike had a suggestion about maybe a guitar strumming, like a close-up.
Well,
But
that depends on. I'm sorry.
Oh no, but you said you had another angle, right?
Yeah, I'm currently working with
Gotcha.
several angles that were captured at this moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of it is working with what was filmed in the moment and working around anything that could visually take away from that. So right now I'm setting up the other camera.
Oh yeah, I like how this is shaping up.
Thank you. One thing I also remember to do whenever I'm working on a project like this is to set up a solid behind all of the footage. Otherwise, if you're going to bring it into After Effects, any area that has the checkerboard pattern, that is going to show up as a transparency or an alpha, as it's also known. So if you prefer it to be completely opaque behind the entirety of the composition, you're going to want to set that up, or at least have your visuals fill the entire composition rather than allowing any transparent spaces.
So you're saying it'll update as a dynamic link as a alpha or transparent?
Yes, it's going to detect that automatically based on where the checkerboard pattern appears.
Right.
So right now,
tip.
Thank you. So right now I'm going to take a look, and I can already tell that there are some small changes I'd like to make to the handheld panels just to balance out with the thickness of the bottom panels here. So it's starting to come together. I think that the framing of the bottom two should be consistent with the top frames. So I can actually go in and I'm going to set up a guide. There's a couple of ways I can go about doing this. But I also want to make sure that on either edge that it's balanced. So if we're going based on this here, it's very close to 60 pixels. So if we want to gauge that as where we want it to line up, so as an example, let's say I set up another solid, and you can do this a number of ways. You can mask out specific parts of the footage or parts of the track mat just to keep the integrity of each of the track mats that are already set up. I'm going to create a new solid and set up a mask that fits that sizing there. Again, there's a number of ways you can go about doing this. It's a matter of how your project is set up and what details you want to keep in. So what's nice about this is just labeling as I go. Now I can also move this over to the other side a number of ways. I'm going to show a little trick here. So if I go to rotation 180, because of where the anchor is, it'll just flip over to the other side. And then we see that it's actually a little thicker over here than it is on the other side. So we can actually balance that out. All right, so now what I need to take into account, and this also helps. You can absolutely use layers to determine the sizing of specific frames for track mats. Now let's see if I can. There it is. So right now I'm moving it over just a little bit so it lines up at that edge. There we go. And we're going to move the center panel so it's balanced on either side. And I'm also going to be playing with the overall scale. So that there's more of a uniform appearance overall. So this is the current setup. Let me set it to, okay, it's already set to fit the screen. Now I'm checking the footage. There's a small moment where there's a bit of a transparency in the middle panel. So I'm going to go take a look at that and adjust it further so that it's entirely within the frame the whole time. Now let me see. That's the one I'm working with. So now that I've made that small adjustment, it should... Yep, that's been taken care of.
Nice. If you're just joining us, we're here with Natalie, and we're working on a social media promo. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in chat. Natalie, we have about 24 minutes left.
Okay, well,
just as a heads up.
I'm going to go ahead and start animating the panels. So the setup for that is to set up guides and then adjust the anchor point of those panels. But I also need to do additional color correction on those as well. So I'm going to jump to the previous composition that I had set up. I'm going to go to Premiere and look for that already. You can tell that it's updated inside of the overall composition. And that was, and I typically do this, I like to make sure that I'm jumping to the right composition. So that's number 6. So I'm gonna grab the color correction from, and this is the final result of one of the previous ones I worked on. So we're gonna go here, and just to double check, I was pulling from camera A. So I want to apply the color correction to the right source footage. Same thing with camera B. So there's that. And I'm going to do some additional adjusting of the handheld footage as well. Now, I did demonstrate prior that you could absolutely play with the reveal of the panels. Right now, I'm working on giving it an overall unified feel before I move forward to the next part. So right now, I'm going to play with the contrast. And it's the panel on the right side of the screen. So all I'm doing right now is I'm playing with the footage to give it a nice pop and contrast. And because it's coming from the same camera source, I can apply that adjustment to the other panels. So you see a little bit more of an emphasis of highlight and shadow that way.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see it coming through. It's starting to match a little bit.
Yeah. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to take a look at the timing of that particular composition. I have markers set up that allow me to time the visuals with the beat of the song. Okay, so that's the starting point, and then so 14 frames in, I'm going to set up a marker there. I'm going to jump ahead a bit to the next one. And that's 28 frames. You can usually gauge the amount of time you'll need between. All right, so 1 second, 11 frames. What I'm doing right now is setting up markers inside of After Effects that tell me where it lines up. So there's the last one, since we have 5 panels to work with. Okay.
And you're using these markers for the reveal time?
Yes.
The panel reveals? All right. Okay.
Because I'm working with track mats that will will visually time with the beat of the song itself. So right now I'm setting up the track mats. So that they line up with those specific points. So in doing that, it now appears like this. Now you can also play with the scale of those particular track mats in order for visuals to be revealed over time. Because there's so many panels, though, I kind of like the more simplistic approach in this case, where they appear as the beat continues. So there is something nice about it because you're seeing so much in one composition. To be able to address everything is definitely important. So the reveal depends on what's being captured, the detail on screen, because we actually have 5 vantage points rather than usually 3 that we're working with. I think that the handheld footage needs to be boosted in contrast just a little bit more. So in addition to working with Lumetri, I will also work with the standalone adjustments just to bring out the values a little bit more. So as an example, it's adjusting the panel on the right-hand side of the screen here. So it's bringing out those darker values, the more I play with the histogram. So I'm going to apply that to the additional ones here. And now you can start to see that blue undertone that I was talking about earlier. All right, so there's one more here. Nice. It feels more unified now because of that balance.
I agree. I think it's really looking like one piece now.
So one thing I also like to do, based on the framing of the two cameras below, I want to make sure that what's being featured is well framed and that you get a sense for the most important details of that particular vantage point. So I'm making small adjustments so there's a nice balance on either side. Yeah, I think that looks a bit more balanced.
I agree. It's looking good.
Thank you. Now, in addition, I like to review my footage to make sure it's the strongest it can be. So if there's anything in it that I feel that needs to be adjusted as I work on the overall project, I will go back and take a look at it. The last thing I like to do, just to give it an overall unified feel, is playing with overall effects adjustments. And you may notice that it suddenly applied the track matte to the adjustment layer that was brought in.
Yep.
That can happen based on arrangement. So your organization of your layers definitely makes a difference. So if you have a specified track matte for a specific layer, definitely make sure that it's completely connected to that layer the entire time. So now that we've set up all of the color adjustments and the balance of highlight and shadow with everything, what I like to do is give it an overall polish, just a very subtle one. Whenever working with adjustments like this, for example, playing with color channels, I like to take into account how much the effect adjusts what I'm working with. So if I have to adjust it in any way, making it more subtle, I'm more than happy to do that. It's all a matter of balance, so that it enhances the work rather than overtakes it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's an effect, this one specifically, that can really get overused if you don't watch it. Not overused, but like it can really blow out an image.
Absolutely.
Distort an image, I guess.
Yeah, if you go extreme with the visuals and the adjustments to the visuals, it can it could make an absolute difference of what you're looking at, but it could also make it look unrecognizable. So you want to be very careful what adjustments you make to whatever your source footage is. Now I'm looking at the two fixed cameras below, and I think it might be interesting to play with the motion of those.
Oh. What do
Just
you have
a
in
bit
mind?
more. Well, I'm going to see if I can emphasize specific points by moving in towards the focus. just by doing that little change, I think that it's actually activated that particular part of the composition. I'm going to do the same thing to the second one here. Okay, so I'm going to play with the position, scale. Now that was just adjusting the scale, but I also want to play with the position of that one as well. All right, so it ends at that point, but I want it to start at a particular point. Already I can tell that that's going to be a lot stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for the other side here, where I'm going to play with the overall scale. I think that definitely made a difference.
It does. It makes a big difference. It's almost like there's a lot to look at. So as they come in, it feels like with that just that little movement, it's like, hey, look at me. I'm next. I'm what's needed to be paid attention to.
It allows it to have an organic feel.
Mm-hmm.
It feels activated as a result of that small change, but it
Yep.
also matches the other sources of footage, which also have a smooth motion applied to those. So there is a nice unity overall with the presentation of each camera, even though we're working with different vantage points. So yeah, I think that this turned out really nicely. I'm looking at it too. There's one small position adjustment I want to make as far as the second panel is concerned.
Natalie, just a heads up, we have about 10 minutes left in the stream. Guys, if you have chat, if you have any questions you'd like to ask, now's the time.
So I'm just checking the position of the middle frame. There's a point where the headroom is a lot shorter there. So taking that into account so that the motion is smooth all the way through. Okay. The goal is to limit the amount of shake, but also maintaining the integrity of the footage that you're working with.
Yeah, that middle frame is interesting too, because I think there's a projection going on behind it. So
There
you're like,
is.
you've got multiple, like a lot of movement going on in there.
Yeah, the stage production of this particular event was just, it was a joy to capture.
From what I can see from the wide, yes, it looks amazing.
But a lot of this process comes from problem solving around issues that visually need to be addressed in order to present visuals in a stronger way. And so that's why I like to employ motion graphics and visual effects compositing approaches to the social media promos and any project really that I work on. Just to give you an idea of how it looks in full res, I'm going to switch over and
nice. Do you have a question? Elizabeth's asking what's the most challenging but rewarding effect you've created in your promos?
oh, that's a good question. It has ranged. I will say that one of my favorite projects that I like to go back to, among many of the ones I've worked on for the black ties, I really wanted to play with the brushes in Adobe Fresco because I remember seeing that program announced at Adobe Max in 2019, among other innovations.
Mm-hmm.
And what excited me about that was the brushes that were meant to be digital counterparts to the actual medium. So watercolor brushes, ink brushes, meant to replicate that actual movement. So
Yeah.
the flow of those inks and paints. And what excited me the most about that was I really wanted to play with those brushes and do hand-drawn rotoscope. And at the time,
Oh, wow.
Fresco was not set up for animation, so I had to do a more manual approach. And so they didn't know I was putting this together, but I ended up surprising the band at one point. But I went through and I went frame by frame with footage that I captured in order to play with hand-drawn rotoscope and surprise them with that. And I do plan on doing another promo like that in the future. I just want to make sure that I'm balancing with all of my deadlines for clients that I work with.
That's cool. Is that, can we see that somewhere? Is that on your Behance page?
Yeah,
Or
it's
okay, excellent.
it's in my
Sam,
demo reel, it's in my
cool.
portfolio, it's on my Behance page.
Very cool.
So I'm just doing a double check. This is full resolution. I'm going to see if I can make the frame a little bit larger. For those of you tuning in, you can actually see the Lumetri scope on the side here.
Oh yeah, there it goes.
Yeah. Somebody was asking about that at the beginning, and you can actually see the highest highlight, but also the darkest. Now I'm working with footage that has a more general color balance, but if you're working with footage, let's say that it's in S-Log or S-Log3 Cine or Cinema, the color value balance is going to be different depending on the format. So, for example, if the highlights and shadows are crushed at a particular point, if there is a solid line and you're working with footage that you're trying to color grade, it's important to avoid those values from being crushed, because if you lose those tones, those highlight and shadow tones, because they're crushed, it's going to cause distortion to the footage. So you want to be very careful working with Lumetri and figuring out how to balance the color so that it's the strongest representation of the footage you're working with, but also that you maintain the quality overall. So it's important to take a look at the scopes and look at the balance overall, but also in this case, allowing for a consistent look and feel, looking at the highlight and shadow undertones and balancing them out. In this case, I was balancing the two fixed cameras to match the tones of the handheld footage, which has sort of a blue undertone to it. So again, looking at the color balance to maintain consistency, among other things.
Yeah, absolutely. Reverb Mike has another question. Will the clips pop in to the beat of the music? I think we're wanting to hear if there's, a music cue for these.
There is, and that was absolutely the plan. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I don't know if it's going to play fluidly, but I can, you know what? I can pre-render this so you can get an idea of the overall timing. Now, the time that it takes to render inside of Premiere absolutely depends on how elaborate the adjustments are.
Yeah.
So if you have a lot of effects adjustments on your footage and it's trying to process it all, or if you're rendering at full resolution or at higher resolutions, it's important to take that into account when making those adjustments. So again, it's coming in based on the beat of the song, which is why we have the markers set up inside of Premiere, and you can set those up any way you want. I have ones that are more designed around the basic timing going by beats of 4, but then also the smaller beats in between those 4 beats to allow for more specific timing.
Right. Can we see that again one more time?
Sure.
Thank you.
course.
We are almost out of time. And Natalie, if you'd like to give us a recap of what we did yesterday and today, that'd be great. And then we'll wrap things up. And
Sure
if you,
thing.
yeah,
So basically, what I'm demonstrating here is part of my training as a generalist in motion design and visual effects compositing. Uh, what I'm doing is I'm basically working with three camera sources, one handheld, two fixed cameras, in order to present the footage in a variety of ways, allowing for different visual looks all the way through, but allow for a cohesion from start to finish for one singular promo for the Black Ties, which is a classic rock band that I work with. So what you're seeing here is every step of production, from filming to recording to then adding post-production adjustments like stabilization of footage, track matting, color correction. So there's a nice cohesion overall. And the goal here was to present multiple panels of different camera sources. So what you're seeing in one frame are several cameras showing exactly what's happening at that point at different
nice.
vantage points.
Well, thanks so much, Natalie. It's been awesome. I appreciate you spending a couple of days with us here. Just to remind everybody, we have Howard Pinsky coming up next with the XD Creative Challenge. So be sure to stick around for that. And thanks, everybody. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, Natalie. Thanks again. I appreciate it. We all
Thank
do.
you.
All right. We'll see you guys soon.